Welcome to Not Just Money with your hosts, Doretta and Li. This isn't your typical podcast about finances. It's a podcast about all the money conversations we aren't having, sometimes not even with ourselves. Join us on this journey of hard truths, lived experience, and the wisdom that comes from both. Because money is never just about money.
Hey Lee, ready to continue with the theft and scam theme?
Honestly, I think this is going to be a hard one because clearly, as you can tell by the sound of my voice, I have a cold that I've been battling for the last week and sound like something crawled into my throat and died. Plus, I'm not even in my usual studio space at home because we had a minor flood yesterday morning. So there are industrial fans and dehumidifiers in my room. But yes, I will regale everyone of tales of theft and scams in this very deep, husky voice that I'm currently wearing. So I think it makes a lot of sense that we're talking about this week because obviously last week we talked about the FIFA World Cup and how the fraudsters and scam artists are in town and hard at work, and they're still here because that festival is still going on. And it was very abstract and speculative. But I've been robbed, and Doretta knows the story intimately. So I know exactly how it feels, and I've been through all of the steps that you have to take. And I think what's really interesting is because I've worked in this space, and so I had the time, the inclination to really dig deep. And I love sharing this story because I'm hoping that whoever listens to it is going to take something from that to either prevent themselves from being in this situation, or if unfortunately they've been marked and become victims, understand the steps. And I think more importantly, the emotional pieces to what it's like when you get robbed, because it really shook me when I went through it. We'll get into that in a bit. I will put some links in the description because Doretta and I have actually already recorded the details of this event. And that way, we'll obviously share some of the timelines, but I won't necessarily go through it as in depth as that episode because now that it's been a few years, there's other learnings that I want to share beyond that. And I think those are actually equally interesting.
So before you start, just one very small editorial detail. As the wife of a retired criminal lawyer, I have to point out that you were not robbed. You were a victim of theft, which is bad enough. I'm not undermining that. But if I don't go on record being accurate, my husband will roll his eyes when he listens to this and ask me if he's taught me nothing.
Okay, robbery, theft. What's the difference? I feel like we generally use it interchangeably, no?
Violence. Theft is taking property without consent. Robbery is taking the property by force, violence, or intimidation.
Okay, fine. I was thefted? Thieved? What is the past terminology for that?
There isn't one. I think that's one of the reasons why people say robbed. So you're a victim of
Okay,
theft because theft
all
is
right.
it's the other person that does it. It's not passive, right?
Oh, okay,
You're pickpocketed.
sure. Yes, great, yes.
Oh, I
But
gave it away.
it's still a violation, though.
Oh,
It's still awful,
absolutely.
and of course, we'll get into that. So, semantics, but I hear you. I think that is important to know the difference,
You
I guess,
get
especially if you
caught.
take it to court.
Yes,
Yeah,
the penalties for robbery are much worse.
fair
Because of
enough.
violence involved, right? Okay. So why don't you start by just telling the story?
Okay, so this was a couple of years ago now. This would have been late March and happened in the city of Toronto. Toronto was warming up, but it was still coat weather. Uh, and funnily enough, Doretta was the person I was seeing at the cafe. Anyways, so we were in Old Town Toronto, which is a very heavy tourist area, even though it was off season because it was kind of late winter. The cafe was very crowded. If memory serves, it had just opened or it was relatively new. And I remember thinking that the tables were very close together. And I just justified it in my mind to say they're a new coffee shop, they're still trying to play with the space, etc. So 10:45 a.m., I entered the cafe. You were already there, splayed out with all your stuff, as I remember. Um, I put my bag down at the table and I went to order a drink at the counter. I had one of those card wallets, so not as heavy duty as the ones with the coin purse and all that. It just had a number of my cards in them, but it was in a zippered pocket on my chest. So I took it out to pay. I tapped my card, replaced it, zipped the pocket again. I sat down with my coffee. It was crowded. I did notice the people around us. There was a couple of middle-aged Asian ladies to the table to my right that were very animated and having a very interesting discussion. And then I did notice that there was a table very close to ours directly behind me. So close that if I had moved my chair back, I would have hit their table. And at that table behind me, I had seen a young lady, no more than early 20s, with shoulder length brown hair. And I distinctly remember, and this was when I went to the bathroom at some point during the 2 hours that we were at the coffee shop, that there were two cups of coffee on the table, but I never once saw her companion. And it struck me as interesting. And
Yeah.
I don't know why. And again, hindsight is 2020. But in that moment, I'm like, huh, that's strange. Clearly there's another person here, but I've just never seen them.
I think it's amazing that you noticed so much because I was pretty oblivious and I was actually facing the table where those people were and I didn't see them at all. I couldn't have told you who was sitting there. I also think it's really interesting noting that how close the tables were because over the 2 years, that cafe has become my regular place. So I know it very well. I think they moved that table. That table is normally about another foot away, which is interesting.
Yes, great. Because it was really easy to
Yeah.
obviously access my stuff. Yeah, and at the end of the day, these are all details I had to go back and provide to the police when I wrote the police report. So I have traveled extensively and I have never been robbed or thieved or thefted anywhere else. And I have to admit that when I'm in Toronto, it's home, right? I've spent a large number of years here. And so I think I'm less careful in Toronto than I would be anywhere else. I think actually in Canada in general, I will say. And so I had draped my coat over my chair, which that's the first thing they tell you not to do when you're traveling to foreign countries, but there you go. So fast forward, Doretta and I hung out for a couple hours and
Come on, we worked. We had our laptops out,
yes, yes,
working meeting.
yes. Fair enough, because you were not retired at that point yet. And this would have been, I think, 12:35 or thereabouts. So less than 2 hours later, I leave the cafe and I look at my phone. Because to be polite, I had my phone face down during our chat. And I see something weird. There's a notification from my bank of a charge for $20 at one of the big pharmacy chains. But I was in the cafe this whole time. So, no, I'm one of those people that, being in the industry, have set up my credit cards so that I get notices for every transaction. And pro tip, if you haven't got your card set up that way, do it now. I know it's annoying because you'll go to a coffee shop, you'll tap, and then an email will pop up and said, "Oh, you spent $5 at XYZ coffee shop." And then you have to delete it, etc. But this is a really great reason why you should have it set up because if any fraudulent activity is happening, you will know fairly quickly because we all know we check our phones very often, generally. So, the first 5 minutes, I will say I'm in deep denial. Now, of course, this is not the first time that my credit card has been compromised. But generally, when you lose it, someone has accessed the card information, let's say from online shopping, or they've skimmed it. Generally, they're using it for online purchases. You very rarely see the results of that stolen information being used at brick and mortar stores. So, my first feeling was, this is not happening. There must be a mistake. So I called my husband. It's important to note that, and I know many people share credit cards, but the credit cards in question were not shared. So the fact that he could spend on these cards was not actually possible, but my mind went there going, oh, maybe for whatever reason, he's using a credit card he has no access to. But this is how you weirdly justify crazy thoughts in your head in real time. Anyway, my husband's like, "No, I'm at work. I'm not at the drug mart." So then the panic really sets in, right? And I'm standing on a busy street just outside the coffee shop. I'm literally stuck and rooted in position. And I actually remember all the people walking by, probably looking at me because I have this face of sheer panic. I immediately take out my wallet, and the first thing I notice is that my pocket was unzipped. That's not a good sign. I am sure I zipped that pocket. I take out my little card wallet and I immediately realized it is much lighter and much thinner than I remember it to be. So then I take out the cards and I immediately realized that 3 credit cards, 2 Visas and 1 MasterCard were gone, along with my Ontario driver's license. That's probably the worst part, not even the credit card part. And my other cards were still there. So they were clearly not interested in my health card, my Presto card. Interestingly enough, they left my debit card, which, you know what, I also appreciate. Thank you. My Nexus card, and people are going to ask me, why do you have your Nexus card? But I had come back from a trip, and then other store cards remained in the wallet. So when I thought about that in the moment, my wallet was taken from my pocket, cards selectively removed, and my credit cards were in different spots because I use them for different things. And then they replaced my wallet. And I didn't notice a thing. And Doretta will attest, she saw nothing. Because she was just as shocked as I was when she walked
Yep.
out the cafe and I was still standing there like a crazy person, holding my wallet in my hand.
Yeah, it's a scary thing to think about that they took it out and put it back again, which just gave them more time with it, right? That's the idea. They think that you're less likely to notice it right away because your wallet's still there. So maybe you're not going to notice it until you actually take it out for another purchase, right?
Yeah, I joke about this and I shouldn't, but I said, at least since I was pickpocketed, it was clearly a pro job. It wasn't just someone who bumped into me and took my stuff I didn't realize. Um, anyway, so okay.
Yeah.
Next thing I do, I know now that I've been thefted, thieved. I still want to say past tense, I'm sorry. And I logged into my online banking account to see what other charges were pending because I knew that was coming. And you remember how much it was?
Yeah, it was over $4,000, I think. It was really crazy high.
Yeah, that was the first one, to be precise. This had been attempted at noon, and it
So
gets
if it was
worse.
pending, does that mean that it had been approved? It had gone through? Yeah.
Yeah, pending means it has gone through because declined wouldn't show up.
Okay.
Then half an hour later, a $2,000 charge was attempted at a different pharmacy in the same chain. That was declined. And I would know this later because I had conversations with the fraud department. And then at 1 p.m., they tried again at yet another pharmacy, $3,000 also declined. And
So
then a number of tiny charges, right? $10 here, $20 there.
and those went through
Yes.
because they would have been just a touch. It's really interesting that there were 3 different pharmacies all in the same chain, so presumably with the same policies, and 2 were declined and 1 went through. Interesting.
Yeah. And it's crazy.
$9,000. Yeah. So that's like $9,000, three different stores in the space of about an hour. Just think about the logistics of that. Okay. So, what did you do when you realized what had happened? Or I guess I should say what was happening, because this was actually, you're watching this in real time, right?
Yeah, I think the first real emotion I felt was deep paranoia because this had just happened. I'm standing in the middle of the road and I feel very powerless at this point because someone had literally gone into my persons and taken something that was mine. And now they were using it fraudulently. And so there was definitely a moment, and I can still remember, even though it's been several years, being like deer in the headlights of life and rooted in place. And I thought, no, okay, snap out of it. You got to do something about this because they're actively using it, right? You can see, and like you said, in real time, the charges that we're going through. So the first thing I did is I found the credit card fraud line number within my online banking. One of the things you have to be very careful about when you use Google or AI now, that when you look up things, the number that pops up is not always the real number because scammers and bad actors have gotten really good at spoofing websites, making sure that the wrong number shows up. So always be extra vigilant. And now I'm also super hyper paranoid because I don't know the extent of how I was targeted, how I was chosen. And so I went into my mobile app and I started calling the bank because the first thing you have to do, and this is really important because banks will try to find a way to make sure it's not their problem, right? So whether or not they're going to come back to the card user and say you didn't do enough to protect yourself or that card or it being abused, or they might actually even go to the stores themselves and say you didn't have processes in place to prevent, so you're going to have to eat those charges. And of course, then insurance companies get involved depending on how much those amounts were. So really, it's about this question of liability. So the moment you realize something is wrong, you must notify the bank because if there is any delay, let's say I decided this is all a misunderstanding. I'll probably figure it out. I'm going to walk home first, and that walk would have been about 25 minutes, and more charges went through. That would have been a question on whether or not those charges would have been my problem because they could have been prevented had I canceled the card. Now, I called the bank, and of course, like I mentioned, I had Visa cards and MasterCards. And that was very difficult because they couldn't cancel them together. And I said, "Why? These are bank cards." So I had to cancel my Visas and then I had to call MasterCard. I got bumped around a couple of times until finally the third agent I spoke to was like, "Oh no, we can cancel all of them. I don't know what these other people were doing." So that's another layer of stress, right? Because you're really trying to do the right thing. You only have so much time. But now what I've noticed, if you go and do online banking and you log in, there is an opportunity to lock your card right away. So that gives you peace of mind. You can actually pick out lost my card right away. And then you can call them and work out what charges were fraudulent. But if you do that immediately, the chances are the loss is less, which is important. But what I found really interesting is the first thing they said to me is they've used your PIN because the charges that went through were like over $1,000. And I said, there's no way. How would they have my PIN? Okay, now my level of paranoia just hit a new level, okay? Because I don't often use my PIN because I don't make purchases that high. So now in my head, I'm like, holy cow, have they been stalking me? Have they been watching me? And I'm trying to rack my brain the last time I actually used my PIN because they would have had to seen it or had access to a machine that scraped that information. So now I'm like a whole new level of panic. And of course, remember, they have my driver's license. So they know where I live.
Scary.
And yeah, I'm just like, I've fallen off a cliff now. And the moment they said this, I remember I was just outside my building and I paused again and I froze again. And I was like, oh my God, do I go home? Are people going to be waiting for me? These are crazy thoughts. Okay. No one was waiting for me at the house, but this was just the narrative that was replaying in my mind. And Doretta can attest to this. I was a bit of a wreck, and this had just happened. So I came home. My husband came home from work because he could really tell I was spiraling into this very dark place. And he's like, okay, can I help? And I said, well, I have to report to the police. Um, and I asked him, could you look it up? Because I wasn't in the frame of mind to figure out what's next. Like, I don't even think I've called 911 before. So I'm like, I don't know how to deal with the police. And that's another level of stress, right? Because, yes, police, lovely folks, but it was this idea that I now had to talk to the police. I'm the victim here, but I'm still stressed about it. There's no rational sense to this. Zero. So I love my husband. He sends me a link. I'm like, okay, it's an online form. I can do this. I click it, and the first thing it says is, these are for financial crimes under $5,000. As you've done the math, we were well over $5,000. So I couldn't even use the link. And I'm like, what do I do now? I'm like, I can't call 911. I'm not in an emergency situation. And I don't want to jam up the lines for people who need it. So I found a non-emergency line for the Toronto Police. Now, every jurisdiction is different. So depending on where you live, it could be different. But everybody has a non-emergency line. And so I called it. A lovely woman answered. I told her my story. She clearly had great trauma training because she was very calm, very supportive. And she's like, okay, I've written the details. I'm going to send it over to the detectives in financial crimes. They'll probably call you either today or tomorrow. They would call me the next day. Lovely detective. I never got the chance to meet him. I did try because he had a very sexy voice. I'm not going to lie. And I even noticed it during this period. And he was very lovely. And he gave me the steps. He's like, look, I need you to call your bank, get all the charges, the timelines, and where. And like I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, I'm really invested, right? This is in my wheelhouse. I wanted to know. I wanted to go through this. And now I felt more empowered after this call, even though, and I had a chance to ask him a lot of questions, I was told that the likelihood that they were going to arrest anybody in this was pretty much non-existent. Because I asked, I said, is that a possibility? Because it's really sophisticated rings, right? You're looking at folks who travel from city to city, and we talked about this during our FIFA episode last week. They'll come, they'll do their bad deeds, and then they leave. And so it's really hard for local police to find these perpetrators. And it was good to have that sense of reality in a way that I knew exactly what was going to happen and not happen. But then you're probably listening to this and going, okay, so the police can do nothing about it. Why bother reporting it? Because you have to do a lot of paperwork, there's a lot of calls, there's a lot of follow ups. And I would say there are two things. One is crime happens in patterns, right? So those individuals who had come and taken my stuff may have left. They probably went to another big city, maybe Montreal, maybe whatever. They're likely to come back. And so having this on record helps the police in the long run. It may not solve your crime, but it allows them to investigate spaces they frequent, how they do the deed. And also, there's a potential that the pharmacies or the stores that they're using the fraudulent cards are also in on it. And so realizing who those extended circles and rings are helps them close that circle to, at the end of the day, find these perpetrators, or at least help the stores that they're using this fraudulent information to have better processes, right? Because one of the biggest deterrent of crime is also the ease of it. So if I've stolen your credit card and your identity, but I can't use it, there's no value in that. It also made me feel better that what he said to me was generally once the credit cards are dead, they're going to dump everything. Because my other fear was that this was the gift that keeps on giving. Because there's a lot of crime syndicates that buy stolen information. Of course, you know, my driver's license is gone. And in 5 years, 10 years, they'll use that stolen information to perpetuate other crimes. And so, what's important to know is that some things, like a driver's license or your social insurance card, that number is for forever. It doesn't change. And so, if they have it or it's out there, published on the black market, whatever, they can use it.
So you've explained how you dealt with your bank and the police. What else did you need to do right away?
There's a couple of things. And it was really nice because obviously I was dealing with a detective who was also a financial crimes expert. So I had a really long chat with him. He told me the report that I needed to write to submit to him so that he could do an investigation. He told me that because of the cards and mostly my driver's license that had been lost, what I had to do was reach out to the credit bureaus. So that would be TransUnion and Equifax, and put a alert on my account that some of my information was stolen. Because, like I said, if they sell this information and it continues, they're not going to use it right away. It's likely that they'll wait and at some point in the future use it for whatever purposes or nefarious purposes. And so it was important that I put those fraud alerts on my account, which also then becomes very tedious if I wanted to get a new credit card or a mortgage or a line of credit. Because what that alert means is you have to jump through extra hoops to confirm your identity. So many calls. And of course, I had to replace all my cards too. And that's just a whole other rigmarole.
And your driver's license. I remember just how upset you were about particularly the driver's license.
I remember I called you and I said, I need to take the rest of the day off. I need to deal with this. I was not in the right frame of mind to go back to work. And so I remember my husband had gone back to work and I was sitting in my room by myself and honestly feeling really sorry for myself that this has happened and why me? I think that's a very common question we ask. And I felt so helpless. And I'm not one of those people that sits there and cries and says, that's it. I can't do anything about it. And so in that couple of minutes, I said, I need to change this story, the situation that I'm in. And so that's when I decided the first thing I was going to do was I was going to go wait in line at Service Ontario, tell them my sad story, and at least get my driver's license back because I felt that was reasserting control.
Okay, so great job on the reporting process. I think we should maybe dig a little deeper into how you felt when you realized what happened because I think it's something people can learn a lot from. Many years ago, we had our apartment burgled while we were away for the weekend. And I remember that feeling of violation and fragility. And we weren't there. So there wasn't that sense of physical proximity. I've never had anything taken actually off my person. And I think that has to be worse. I was there when it happened. I remember how freaked out you were. I have
Mhm.
never seen you so off center.
Yeah, I don't consider myself generally someone who is very anxious, who gets scared easily. But to your point, you're right. Like that proximity, the fact that they were close enough to touch me, to take something,
Yeah.
even though there was no violence. I can't even imagine what that would be like if you were actually robbed at knife point, gunpoint, whatever the case may be. And we know that happens to a lot of people. It was still harmful to me. It really made me question and rethink everything about that moment, those 2 hours. Did I do something wrong? Did I make myself a victim? Could I have done something differently? That stuff replays in your head. And it was really interesting because I had written this police report. And once the detective received it, he called me. He's like, "You have really clearly thought about everything. This is the most detailed police report of a theft that I have ever received." It was literally 2 pages long. Every detail was in there. I took out the emotional bit of it because I'm like, it's probably not pertinent for the detective to know how I felt. But it was really therapeutic in a way because I could write it all out and view it from a perspective of this is how it happened, and then replay it to realize that I was just really unlucky, right? In that moment, you think about, oh, if I didn't go to the coffee shop, if I didn't pay with my card, because I had my phone, but at that time, I actually wasn't using Apple Pay as much as I do now. But I could have used it. It was in my hand. Why did I have to get my wallet? Because one of the things is someone can't steal from you if they don't know where your item is. So if I hadn't taken out my card, they wouldn't have taken it. And so all these things replay in your mind. And then all the worst possible outcomes, right? That's where anxiety comes from about what can happen. I remember taking the subway a couple of days later, and I wouldn't stand next to anybody. Even though this, in the decades I lived in Toronto, this has never happened to me before. But now, anybody standing next to me, automatically a thief. And it's irrational, okay? Because most people are decent human beings, but it just so happened that I got caught in it, and it just changed the way I saw people for a period of time.
Yeah. I think your experience is pretty common. We move through our days assuming that the world's pretty predictable and that we're pretty prepared for it and we can take care of ourselves. And having something stolen like that, it actually challenges those assumptions. So then you're really off kilter. A lot of victims say that the most painful part isn't what they lost, isn't what was stolen. It's realizing that somebody deliberately did this to you. And you find yourself in that kind of spiral of, how didn't I notice? I should have been more careful. Can I trust people around me? Is this going to happen again? And you get into that whole anger, shame, anxiety, loss of trust. And that's just how it goes. I know it's kind of how I felt after our apartment was broken into, too. You feel violated.
Yeah. And in the moment, it's really hard. And I had the time and enough knowledge about what to do next, and I was still paralyzed. And you kind of have to sit in it for a moment, but then you ultimately have to move on.
Right.
It
How do you do
happened.
that? Yep. How was that for you?
For me, it was, I think it took a lot longer than even I expected. But in the end, you have to move past that feeling of violation and accept the situation. It happened. You can't go back and unring that bell. And you work through it. You ask yourself these questions that you've really succinctly asked. But for me, it was about the processes that I needed to heal. I know it's such a strange word, but for me, it was part of that journey where I said writing it out, and I've talked about it before, how journaling for me is a huge outlet, just to name those emotions that I was feeling and see them and recognize them and ask myself where that was coming from and what I would need to do to override them or let them go. And there were a lot of feelings, right? And realizing that I had to stop worrying over the things that I can't control, right? In the future, if someone uses my information fraudulently, sadly, that's a future me problem. But it's not something current me could do anything about. So if I'm sitting here worrying about something that hasn't happened, what does that say about my current state of mind? And then changing some of my habits, right? Taking precautions, but getting on with my life. Because honestly, what is the alternative?
And I think that's a really healthy response. That is what they tell you to do to work it through. You start by separating responsibility from vulnerability. You feel really vulnerable, but that doesn't make you responsible. And I think you have to have that line. It's not unlike what we were talking about, the difference between shame and guilt, where shame you internalize, but guilt, you made a mistake, you fix it, and then you go on and you do what you can do. So I think that's the thing, is that you learn from the experience, but you don't take blame for the fact that somebody else decided to steal. Then get on with regaining your sense of agency. It starts with all the stuff you did, replacing the cards, the police reports, the credit bureaus, all that. It's interesting that you said after you reported to the police how much better you felt, because you're taking that positive step, right? You're doing something to get your agency back. And then I think it's all about applying what you've learned and making yourself less a victim. And also, I think even what you're doing right now by just sharing it so that you help other people prepare, give them an idea of what to do if it happens to them.
And I think that's really important. When I spoke to the police, I really did feel seen. I didn't ever felt that they blamed me. And I think that's a real fear from victims of any crime, that they feel people are going to say, oh, you did this, and that's why this happened to you. No, the police understand it and they've seen it. And so it made me feel better because I didn't feel so alone. I didn't feel like it was just my fault, that it was just bad luck. And so for people who don't report crimes or don't feel confident in it, you should. You should talk to somebody about it. Maybe it's not the police, right? I lucked out. I don't know if every interaction with the police is that positive. It was for me on all accounts. And I'm sure there are people who have had bad experiences. But the thing is, with these types of emotions, and we've talked about it when we mentioned shame, it gets embedded in your identity, that victimization, if you don't work through it and ultimately let it go.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And I think honestly, the anxiety and the fear persist. That's really when it's time to get help to deal with it, right? Okay, so after all of that, how did the story end? Did the police ever catch anyone?
The police already told me early on, very unlikely they were going to catch anybody. But of course, they were still going through all the motions to get my statement. And this was very important because remember that I still had to deal with the charges that were pending on my credit card. So having that police report was critical in that step, not to be on the hook for what was ultimately, I think, $7,000, because as some of the charges were declined, because the fraud departments at the different banks called and said, once you talk to the police and you get a case number, you have to send it to us because we will also do our investigation. This is also a pro tip. The fraud detection units at the banks will ask you a number of questions. You need to be very thoughtful on how you answer because it's all about liability. So, yes, I filed a police report. That's a check mark. But then they'll ask about how you protected those cards. That PIN number was a big question because how did they get away with such large charges if they didn't have the PIN number? And so they'll ask questions like, is it a easily guessed number? So, for example, they took my driver's license. A lot of people will use their date of birth. right? Or the year of birth because it's a 4-number PIN. And maybe they tried that and it was declined. And I said, no, I am smart enough to know that a PIN number should be 4 random numbers that are not connected to anything that you have ID for, etc. And in fact, all 3 of those cards have different PIN numbers. If they had been able to break the PIN on one of them, they could not access the other 2 numbers. And finally, they would ask me this question: did you write your PIN number somewhere, in your wallet, whatever? But there are lots of people who actually write their PIN numbers on their cards or in a sheet of paper in their wallets. But had I at any point said that the PIN number was written somewhere that the scammers had access to, or the thieves had access to, that would have voided my insurance with the credit card, which means that I would have been on the hook for that $7,000. That's terrifying because that's a lot of money. And so later they would call me back, and this is the end of the story. And this was months later. So they might remove the charges from those credit cards, but at any point, if they find fault with you, put those charges back on your card. Had that PIN been compromised, I would have been really screwed. But what they found was that it wasn't, that they had found specific pharmacies that accepted signed credit card payments. And so that meant I was off the hook. But it was still touch and go until the end because one of the questions I asked the detective was, could the credit card companies come back at me and make me pay these amounts? And he said, yes, absolutely. And I've seen it. So I don't want people to have the sense of, well, it's on my credit card, I'm insured. Yes, but you're insured to a point. If you answer any questions that at all put into question your part in it and whether or not you protected that information, you could very well be on the hook for that.
So this happened a couple years ago now. What has been the long-term effect? Did your behavior change? Did those changes stick? Did they become permanent?
Yes, if I was being honest, I don't take my wallet anywhere anymore unless I'm driving, definitely your driver's license. But beyond that, everything's on my phone. Because as we know, the phone is never 3 centimeters away from our bodies at all times, so we know where it is, and it's heavier. And when I do take my wallet, I don't put it in my pocket. I will always now carry a purse, even though I find them cumbersome, and I don't leave anything on my chair anymore. So after that experience, I definitely am more conscious of where I'm leaving my things. Not to think honestly that this would be repeated if I went back to my old ways, but certain experiences change you.
I think those are really good steps. And they say that an ounce of prevention's worth a pound of cure. I think that it is something we can all learn from. According to police departments across Canada, these are the things that you should do to make yourself less attractive to thieves and pickpockets. So, first of all, you keep your phone and your wallet, if you're carrying one, in your front pockets or inside zippered compartments.
As long as
You
you don't leave the coat on the chair.
Right,
Because in
right.
my case, it was in my front pocket. Just don't
Yeah,
drape it over the chair.
exactly. Wear your bags, like your purses or whatever, across the front of your body when you're in a crowded area. Don't keep anything valuable in your back pocket because that's what they're most likely to go for. It's easy pickings. Keep your backpack zipped up all the time. Make sure you're physically touching it. And of course, we talked about this last week. Be particularly alert when you're at a festival, a sporting event, concert, parades, transit hubs, anywhere where there are lots of people around you. Specifically about your phones, make sure your phone tracking and the remote lock features are enabled. And if your phone is stolen, again, report it really quickly and also add your wireless provider to the list of people that you need to contact.
So basically, use the same precautions you would when you're traveling elsewhere.
Exactly. Okay, 3 key learnings for today.
Pickpocketing is a real risk, especially around large crowds, festivals, shopping centers, public transit in rush hour, and tourist areas. So, if, like Doretta, you live in a high tourist area or are going to hang out at events and other crowded areas, be alert and think prevention.
Second, the emotions around being robbed, pickpocketed, stolen from are real. These feelings of violation, everything attached to it, it's hard. So be kind to yourself, give yourself time to process all the feelings. So accept that it happened. It's the important first step. Don't worry about what you can't control. That just steals your happiness today. Worry about it when it happens. You can't hide away. You can't keep blaming yourself. You were unlucky. It happened, but you can take the steps to see it through to the end. Don't blame yourself for things that you're not responsible for. You were a victim. It's not your fault that somebody else decided to steal.
Finally, report thefts immediately. If you do fall victim, report the theft to the police, to the bank, to credit bureaus, appropriate government departments for stolen ID, and if your phone was stolen, to your mobile phone provider. Even though the police aren't likely to recover your stuff, because many of these thefts are by skilled and organized crews who breeze in and out of town, reporting matters to establishing patterns.
And that's us for today. Have you been a victim of theft? How did you feel? How did you process the feelings? And how has the experience changed your behavior? If you've got a story to share, why don't you drop us a line or 10 at notjustmoneypodcast@gmail.com.
Good talk.
You've been listening to Not Just Money with Doretta and Li. Click on the show's description for links to resources related to today's conversation. Our aim is to share sources that provide objective information that can help you make informed financial decisions. Please rate and review our show. If you'd like to get in touch with us, email us at notjustmoneypodcast@gmail.com. If you'd like to be featured on the show, you can send us your questions and comments by a written email, audio file, or video file. Please include your name and city. This show is produced and edited by Lee, with original music by Leo Zhang cello and artwork by John Tu. Now for some legalese. Please note that the views expressed by our hosts and guests are theirs alone and should not be viewed as financial advice. This podcast is intended to be entertainment and educational in nature. Please seek additional professional support or information before acting on any podcast information. As always, good talk.